It was in 1937. I was 13 years old. We had a baseball team. There's a bunch of kids in a sand lot. We called ourselves the Spartans, growing up there in Seagate. In Coney Island, we had the beach, we had the ocean, barefoot all summer long. Well, on May 4th, the German airship Hindenburg came across from Germany, and it came right over the ball field that we were playing on. It had a big swastika on the tail, so we picked up bricks and rocks and threw it at it. It was that swastika. We could connect with what was happening in Germany, with Hitler. Seagate at that point was largely Jewish. Everybody knew about the Germans. The extent of their viciousness, that was another matter. That was another matter.
More than 500,000 Jewish Americans served in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II.
As Americans and as Jews, we realized that we had to protect what we have in this country: liberty, freedom of religion and speech. And as Jews, we did what they thought we couldn't do.
They were rich and poor, urban and rural, religious and secular. Most were the children of immigrants who had escaped persecution in Europe and were welcomed onto America's shores. Now, they would return to battle the hatred that their parents had fled. They would endure anti-Semitic slurs from their fellow servicemen and be forced to prove that they were also true Americans.
My fellow soldiers wanted to know, how on earth did you wind up in the infantry on the front lines? You're Jewish. I said, because I wanted to be there.
Like all Americans, they fought against fascism, but they also fought a more personal fight: to save their brethren in Europe.
We went to war to destroy the Nazis, and that was a mission for all of us. We went to war to save the world.
They would come home changed and would continue the fight for equality and tolerance in America.
Hundreds of thousands of Jews returned to the United States and changed the people around them. It was a transformative moment in the history of the United States and the history of American Jews.
We were there for a reason: to reclaim who we were and not to forget who we were and where we came from. That's why we went.
In January 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany. From the beginning, their ideology was steeped in racial hatred and anti-Semitism. German Jews were segregated from the rest of society, their businesses marked with a Jewish star. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws defined Jews as a separate race and stripped them of their citizenship.
My father was a teacher. Hitler came to power, and my father lost his position. My mother decided her children would have no future in Germany, and we emigrated in 1938, just before the persecution turned deadly.
Keiner mehr dann in Deutschland leben wird.
On November 9, 1938, Hitler's campaign against the Jews escalated into violence. The Nazis burned more than 200 synagogues and destroyed thousands of Jewish businesses in what would become known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Thousands of Jews fled Germany, afraid for their lives.
One day, my brother Isaac at 16 and I at 14, we left Germany. And little did I know, if anybody would have told me, you'll return as an American soldier, I would have stopped this dreaming.
On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Almost immediately, Hitler's forces began to round up Poland's 3.2 million Jews and force them into ghettos. In the next 2 years, Hitler seized most of Europe, marching relentlessly through the Low Countries, into France, Denmark, and Norway, and deep into the Soviet Union. There, the Nazis massacred hundreds of thousands of Jewish men, women, and children, the first mass killings of Jews in German-occupied territories.
The rumors were in the Jewish community that Jews were being slaughtered and it was, something had to be done about it.
But most Americans did not want to go to war until December 1941, when everything changed.
Me and my friends played basketball on December 7th, 1941. And as we're walking back home, all of a sudden, extra, read all about it, Pearl Harbor bombed. And we looked at each other and we said, where the hell is Pearl Harbor? That was the beginning.
The next day, America entered the war.
The day after Pearl Harbor, I got on line. There were 2 lines as far as you could see people enlisting. That is Texas. Texas is that way. A great feeling of patriotism. Texas draft is a bad word. You enlist. You drafted. You don't say that.
You're in the army now. You're not behind the plow. You'll never get rich while digging a ditch. You're in the army now.
Well, you had to understand the all-embracing quality of that war. It's like nothing ever since. My older brother was a naval officer. 6 of my older first cousins were in the military, including my cousin Anna, who was a WAC, Women's Army Corps. That was typical.
When I went into the service, we sang the songs, over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming everywhere.
Over there, send the word.
10,000 Jewish women signed up as well, disregarding their parents' warning that it was no life for a nice Jewish girl. They would serve as wasps in the Air Force, waves in the Navy, WACs in the Army, and as nurses overseas.
I wanted to be a nurse in the Army. My sister Dorothy and I quit our jobs. And if my mother knew that we even thought of going into a Goyish army, a Gentile army, I don't know what she'd have done.
The first taste of military life for the Jewish enlisted men and women was in training camps scattered across the United States. $16 million Americans came to basic training. For 8 weeks, 10 hours a day, the Jewish servicemen prepared for combat, surrounded by men from every part of the country.
My basic training was in Camp Crowder, Missouri. I remember this night we went to bed, and across the barracks I hear this voice, Reiner, Reiner. Yes? There was one of these anti-Semitic blondies from Louisiana, and he said, "You a Jew, J-E-W-U-E, you a Jew?" I says, "Yes, as a matter of fact. Why do you ask?" And then the strange thing, he said, "I'm from Louisiana. You know a Jew named Goldfarb?" I says, "No, there are many Jews I don't know." "You don't know Goldfarb?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, he's not a bad guy." That was the last thing he said, and that was it.
In the early 1940s, many Americans who lived outside major cities had never seen a Jew before they met one in uniform. They had heard only the negative stereotypes that Jews were unpatriotic and shirked their military duty.
They didn't think much of us. Actually, they didn't think there were any Jews in service. I'm seventh generation in my family to wear an American uniform. My great-great-grandfather served during the Civil War.
Jews came from every background. Some were recent immigrants, and some had been in the United States for generations. They were Zionists, socialists, and even pacifists.
Jews in the military represented a very broad spectrum of Jewish life. You had Jews who were Orthodox and observant, kept kosher. On the other hand, you had a whole spectrum of Jews who were much more easygoing.
I never had a cheeseburger until I got the basic training. Jews generally weren't allowed to mix milk and meat. So these kids were eating cheeseburgers, and I ordered one and tasted it, and I said, "This is good. Why have the Jews denied me this wonderful thing called cheeseburgers?"
We were Orthodox, but in the army, you couldn't observe everything. They tried to cater to the Jewish GIs, you know. They even sent us some food sometimes, like for Passover, they used to send some matzahs, big filter fish sometimes.
Far from home, many servicemen and women took comfort in their religious traditions. The Jewish Welfare Board sent supplies, including candles for the Sabbath and tens of thousands of miniature prayer books.
Isaac Ashkenazi, he was very observant, being Orthodox. He prayed a couple of times a day. And Carl Frischman and I would just look at him in wonder, you know, and say, when's the next shoe going to fall, and when is he putting us at risk? We thought about this.
Many Jewish GIs feared harassment or insults from their fellow servicemen.
My bed partner in the barracks, I was in the upper bunk and he was in the lower bunk, and we became very friendly. At Passover, I said to him that I'm going home to Chicago, and he said, "You're Jewish?" I said, "Yes." "Why?" He didn't say anything. And for the rest of the time that we were in the barracks, which was approximately 6 months, never spoke to me once. I was so shocked and surprised that I didn't know what to say. And we never talked again.
A lot of the women in the WWII, they were kind of tough. I wasn't happy they're being Jewish because sometimes the way they talked against the Jews. So I didn't advertise the fact that I was Jewish.
I put a picture up the wall. We won some sectional basketball tournament back home. I was proud of it. And it was myself, a Catholic buddy of mine, and 3 black kids. We all have our arms around each other, and the Southern boys are walking by, and I hear, "You got your arms around that nigger?" And then every day on the bulletin board, the red letters, Moskin, the nigger lover. And then the next day it was Moskin, the kike. I was a young soldier. We're the good guys. We're going over to fight the Nazis, the bad guys. And then I got guys, so to speak, on my side talking like that about blacks and Jews. It was something that I didn't expect. To me, it's shameful.
To smooth over religious differences, the military launched a campaign promoting the three fighting faiths, reminding the men that they were all in this war together. From synagogues across the nation, more than half of America's 2,000 rabbis volunteered as chaplains. 311 received commissions. David Max Eichhorn, a 36-year-old rabbi from Pennsylvania, arrived at Camp Croft in South Carolina in July 1942.
My grandfather said it was his patriotic duty. He was an American first, then a soldier, and then a Jew. He really felt he had a place and a calling. Really, all the chaplains administered any type of religious solace to anyone of any faith. They were all working to help prepare the men to go overseas and possibly never come back.
Millions of young men and women boarded troop ships to go off to war. They were issued dog tags stamped with their name, their serial number, and also their religion, so they could receive appropriate last rites and burial. P for Protestant, C for Catholic, H for Hebrew. For Jews serving in Europe, the H put them at greater risk. They had heard rumors that the Germans mistreated or even murdered Jewish prisoners of war. In January 1942, when the first American troops arrived overseas, Hitler and the Axis powers, Italy and Japan, were winning the war. The Nazis had conquered large parts of the Soviet Union and defeated the British in the deserts of North Africa. Jewish GIs landed in the midst of unimaginable violence and destruction.
I learned it was just a matter of kill or be killed. So that's what you go into combat with. Either you kill the enemy or they're going to kill you.
I was a United States Army nurse. My job was operating room, to give anesthesia. You always had a patient in front of you. When they carry one out, they bring one in. Someone just didn't make it. It was rough. And they cried. The kids cried.
I became a bombardier. I saw many planes blow up in front of me. So I don't care what they say. Everybody had a religion when they fought in combat. When the flak came up and the fighters came in, I said, if there's anybody up there, look over me.
In December 1942, the New York Times reported it is believed that 2 million European Jews have perished and that 5 million are in danger of extermination. 160,000 German Jews had been deported to death camps, the Times wrote. More than 600,000 had been murdered in Poland. Most of the Jews in Eastern Europe had been massacred, forced into ghettos, or sent to concentration camps.
I went into the Air Corps to become a bombardier navigator. I put up 54 missions. I was motivated. I was angry. I was angry at the German arrogance, the German brutality. I felt a strong affinity. My parents were from Europe. I was the first generation American, or maybe the last generation Europe. I used to write on my bombs, Hitler, here's a gift for you. And we dropped the bombs on them. I would say, here's a gift from us Jews. And it gave me some satisfaction. It's a terrible thing. War is a terrible thing, but when you're fighting an enemy that is so brutal and so inhuman, you have to do it. I was angry at the Germans for making me do that.
The German Jewish GIs who had escaped the Nazis just a few years earlier were now American servicemen, and they returned to Europe to fight. For them, the war against Hitler was profoundly personal.
Getting out of Germany and then back again in Europe was my great chance to get even, not just against the Nazis, but with anti-Semitism altogether. Our mission was psychological warfare.
As natives of Germany, they knew the language and culture of the enemy better than anyone else, and the U.S. military began to recruit them for counterintelligence. Henry Kissinger was drafted in 1943 and was serving as a rifleman in the 84th Infantry Division. One day, he was on duty cleaning the latrine when his commanding officer pulled him aside.
The commanding general said, "Soldier, explain this situation map to me." So I did. And he turned to his aide and said, "Take that man's name." And then I became part of the counterintelligence in which we were supposed to find spies and security risks. But that sounds very dramatic, except I didn't really know what a spy looked like and what a spy was likely to do.
By June 1944, the Allies had gained ground against the Nazis in Italy, but Hitler still controlled most of the European continent. Allied leaders now readied the troops for the most ambitious operation of the war, D-Day, the invasion of occupied France from the sea. More than 160,000 British, Canadian, and American men would be placed into harm's way, making it the most dangerous battle of the war.
Right before D-Day, I was in England, training for the invasion. They told us, 2 out of 3 of you are not coming back. I wrote to my sister Ethel, get the telegram before my parents and break it to them gently, because I'm not coming home. I decided to draw a huge Star of David on the back of my Army field jacket. I wrote Bronx, New York, around the Star of David. I had to let the Germans know where I was coming from. My fellow soldiers couldn't believe that I was going to do that. Guys in the outfit said, the Germans are going to cut your so-and-sos off when they see that. We landed about 6:40 on Omaha Beach. In landing, the man that I was covering came off the runway first, and he got machine gunned. I was right behind him. Everybody in that boat was killed except for 2 of us. About 30 of our guys were hiding behind 2 tanks to survive. I decided, being Jewish, I better go straight in. I didn't want to look like a coward. I wanted the fellas to see that I didn't have the fear. I'm not going to take cover. My object was to reach the seawall. That was the only protection on the beach to the machine guns firing. And finally, I got hit. Shell came in and blew this cheek right off and broke the upper jaw. My best buddy from the boat, he was laying face down in the 2 inches or 3 inches of water. And he could see his high school ring on his hand. There was my best buddy, dead. I prayed the Shema during that day, out loud. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. The Lord is one. That was the only prayer I said on the beach. It was a horrible day. It was the longest day. You're lucky you two lived through all that. I did get wounded 5 times.
D-Day was successful, placing an enormous Allied army in Northern Europe. But the losses were devastating. Rabbi chaplains held services for the Jewish dead. The surviving men gathered together to honor the friends they had lost.
You make friends, you lose them, and then it becomes very hard. Archie Stein, with his name, sounded Jewish, and they picked on him. He happened to be a Lutheran from Macon, Minnesota, and he was my best friend, and unfortunately, he was killed in action.
In combat together, our lives depended on each other. Religion was far in the back. Maybe they were biased at some point, but the Army knocks that out of you, because what you find out about a person is his character, what his values are, not what his religion is.
On August 25th, 1944, American troops marched in triumph down the Champs-Élysées. After 4 long years of Nazi control, the city of Paris was free. The streets filled with victorious American soldiers and joyful French men and women. But the few remaining Jews stayed in hiding, still afraid. Captain Maury's paper arrived in Paris soon after liberation with a personal mission to discover if any of his French relatives had survived.
I had a list from the family back home of about 10 names of relatives that never got to America. They stayed in France. Now, I see a man is leaning on a lamppost, and he's reading a Yiddish newspaper. And I get up close to him, and I said, "Bist a Yid?" My God, the paper comes down. He looks at me, he says, "That's Yiddish." I said, "Yes, I speak Jewish." He says, "Leave me your list, and I'll make some investigation. We have a Jewish underground. We find out who's dead, who's alive, where they live. Within a week, I actually found my relatives that were not killed. Ladies, the men were all gone, but I found 2 aunts and 4 cousins."
In September 1944, American troops crossed the Siegfried Line, a massive Nazi fortification 400 miles long. The Jewish servicemen had finally entered Hitler's Germany. Among them was Private Cy Lewin, who had fled the Nazis as a teenager only 10 years before. He drove along the front lines in a truck outfitted with loudspeakers, trying to persuade the Germans to surrender.
My very first mission, I was afraid that when I would start talking to them, my voice would give me away that really I'm very much afraid. But then you close my eyes and I just bellowed into it. Deutsche Soldaten. And once that was out, as I would say to the Germans, "We're all in this war together. So let's be done. Give up now."
Little did they know, when they put down their weapons, that the American soldier they were surrendering to was in fact a German Jew.
I'm a little guy there. I would always stand on the highest part of my truck to seem taller than I really am. I felt tall. And then, of course, the Nazis surrender. But I felt elated.
As American forces marched through Hitler's Europe in the winter of 1944, rumors that the Nazis were murdering Jewish prisoners of war continued to spread. Hearing news that Jewish soldiers in the Soviet army had been singled out and shot, some American officers encouraged their men to destroy their dog tags. On December 16th, deep in the Ardennes forest in Belgium, the Germans launched a massive assault on American forces. What would become known as the Battle of the Bulge.
So this huge German onslaught came as an absolute surprise. That was just the beginning of what became a very brutal battle. You had a whole American, regiments that were American prisoners by the score were taken there.
19,000 Americans died in the Battle of the Bulge, and 15,000 more were captured.
The Germans came at us in force, pushed through on our flanks. I threw away my dog tags, which had my religion on it.
Sergeant Lester Tanner and his unit were taken prisoner, and in late January, he and the other officers were moved to a prison camp called Stalag 9A.
They announced that the Jews had to form up in front of the barracks the next morning, and those who do not will be shot.
Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds, a Protestant from Knoxville, Tennessee, was known for his strong leadership and deep moral conviction. He was the commanding officer in charge of the 1,275 American prisoners.
Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds told his officers, "We will all be there in the morning, in formation, and I will be at the head." The next morning, we were lined up. Major Siegmund strides over. He says, "You can't all be Jews." Roddy said to him, "We're all Jews here. You don't tell a Gestapo man that you're not going to listen to his order." The German takes out his Luger, points it at Roddy's forehead, and he says, "You will order the Jewish American soldiers to step forward, or I will shoot you right now." And he said to him, "Major, you can shoot me, but if you do, you're going to have to shoot all of us, because we know who you are, and this war is almost over, and you will be a war criminal." And the major just spun around and went back to his barracks. And Roddy dismissed the men.
Edmonds saved nearly 200 Jewish American men that day. They would never forget the extraordinary risk he took on their behalf. By early 1945, millions of Americans had been sent into combat. Wherever servicemen went, chaplains went with them, offering spiritual comfort in the face of the horrors of war. Rabbi Roland Gittleson was stationed in the Pacific, the only Jewish chaplain with the 5th Marine Division. A committed pacifist before the war, the fight against Hitler's evil had changed his mind. According to Jewish law, he wrote, "It was a war of obligation. In such a war, every Jew must fight." On February 20th, Rabbi Gittleson went ashore with the Marines in the invasion of Iwo Jima, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Afterwards, he was asked to lead an interfaith service honoring the dead. But some of the other chaplains objected to a Jew presiding over a memorial for men of all religions. Reluctantly, the head chaplain agreed to hold 3 separate services instead. Rabbi Gittleson spoke at the Jewish service, reading the words he had originally written to honor all of the men. Here lie officers and men, black and white, rich and poor, together. Here are Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, together. Among these men, there is no discrimination, no prejudices, no hatred. Whoever of us lifts his hand in hate against a brother, or who thinks himself superior to those who happen to be in the minority, makes of this ceremony and the bloody sacrifice it commemorates an empty, hollow mockery.
This was, Gittleson said, the reason why these men died. And if you, the living, don't carry on this vision of equality to eliminate these distinctions between men, then you will be betraying the deaths of your fellow soldiers.
We here solemnly swear that this shall not be in vain. Out of this will come, we promise, the birth of a new freedom for the sons of men everywhere.
By April 1945, after 4 long years of fighting, the Allies had advanced deep into Germany. American troops triumphantly marched into Nuremberg, the symbolic center of the Nazi regime. As the Nazis retreated, they began to abandon their vast network of concentration camps, which stretched across all of occupied Europe. By January 1945, the Soviet army had liberated the Nazi death camps in Poland, including Majdanek and Auschwitz. On April 4th, 1945, American troops on patrol south of Gotha, Germany, came upon Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald.
None of us were prepared for what we saw when we hit that camp. As a Jew, I'd heard stories, but we were not prepared. The prisoners, they worked them to death. They starved them, and when they died, they burned them. I was not the only one who threw up. I was not the only one who cried. But it made us angry. Very, very angry.
1 week later, Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower visited Ohrdruf. Shocked by what he saw, Eisenhower ordered all American units in the area to visit the camps. "We are told that the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for," he said. "Now, at least, he will know what he is fighting against." Alan Moskin was an 18-year-old soldier with the 71st Infantry Division when his unit discovered Gunskirchenlager, a subcamp of Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria.
All of a sudden, the most overpowering, nauseating stench. It was a smell that got into your nostrils, into your body. It's a smell I can never, ever forget. I'm going to tell you, entering that camp was the most horrific sight I've ever seen or ever hope to see the rest of my life. Their cheeks were all hollowed out, eyes sunken back into the sockets of their head. They all looked alike. I remember seeing many chanting prayers, looking skyward. Some were crawling. My buddies, they couldn't have been nicer to myself and another Jewish fella. Just pissed off as much as I was, if not more. They're going to kill every Nazi SOB. They screamed and hollered, "My God, these are civilians. How can you treat people like this?"
The horrified servicemen tried to help, handing out rations to the desperate prisoners. Most of the survivors did not speak English, and so when they could, Jewish GIs spoke to them in Yiddish, the language shared by most European Jews.
The lieutenant knew I was Jewish, and he said, "Moskin, say something in Yiddish." So I said, in German, "Ich bin auch ein Jud." "Ich bin auch ein Jud." That means that I am also a Jew. I remember this elderly man, he came toward me, and then he wrapped his arms around me. "Jude, Jude, Amerikaner, Jude, danke." You know, American Jew soldier, thank you. And then I felt tears on my cheek as he came up. He was holding me tight, and I started to cry, and I'm not embarrassed to say that it was very emotional.
Many more soldiers on patrol throughout Germany would also bear witness to the camps. Cy Lewin went to Buchenwald, where 20,000 survivors had been liberated by the American army.
And I got into the crematorium, and the ovens were still had the ashes in them. You can tell that, they were still burning bodies very recently. And I broke down. I completely fell apart. I went to the medical station and I told them I can't go on. The war was over for me. And within a few days, I was on a hospital ship. Going home.
Rabbi David Max Eichhorn arrived at Dachau on April 30th, the day after it was liberated. "We cried not merely tears of sorrow, we cried tears of hate," he wrote later. "Combat-hardened soldiers, Gentile and Jew, black and white, cried tears of hate." After 6 days of tending to the survivors at Dachau, Rabbi Eichhorn held a religious service for them.
Today I come to you in a dual capacity, as a soldier in the American Army and as a representative of the Jewish community of America. We are proud to know that we have had a share in the destruction of the most cruel tyranny of all time. We are proud to salute you who have been the bravest of the brave. We know your tragedy. We know your sorrows. We know that upon you was centered the venomous hatred.
The Torah Eichhorn prayed with had been given to him in France, salvaged from a desecrated synagogue and hidden from the Nazis.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Eichhorn would discover later that one of his own family members, his namesake, Uncle Max, had been murdered at Dachau. Nearly 6 million Jews had been killed by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. 1,000 years of Jewish life and culture in Europe had all but been destroyed. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allied forces. Just 1 week earlier, Adolf Hitler had committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin, where he had been hiding for months. Although the war against the Japanese still raged in the Pacific, the Allies declared victory in Europe.
It was VE Day. Everybody was yelling and screaming and running in the streets.
VE Day happened. We were in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. That's where all the good beer comes from. So we had a good drink of beer.
While many celebrated, some Jewish servicemen were overwhelmed by the horrors they had witnessed. 26-year-old Sergeant J.D. Salinger, the grandson of a rabbi from Lithuania, had survived D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, and helped liberate the concentration camps. Throughout it all, he had carried with him a collection of stories he had written during his service, the first draft of The Catcher in the Rye. Now, he spent VE Day alone, sitting on his bed, holding a loaded pistol. Soon afterwards, he checked himself into a hospital in Nuremberg and was diagnosed with battle fatigue.
J.D. Salinger experienced firsthand many of the most horrific campaigns in Europe. If you look at his stories, the shadow is so strong of the war, particularly in a short story he wrote in which the main protagonist is a Jewish GI, and the story ends with him committing suicide. So it's this deep shadow over this notion of what it meant to be a Jew after the war.
Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the Allies continued to battle the Japanese. Then, in August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 14th, Japan formally agreed to an unconditional surrender, and the Allies declared victory over Japan. Now, finally, World War II had come to an end. The servicemen were joyfully reunited with their parents, their siblings, and their wives and girlfriends.
I saw my wife. We didn't talk. We sat in the back of the car that picked us up 5 to 10 minutes without saying one word, just staring at each other. Just staring. No words were spoken. And finally, we broke down and hugged and kissed each other. It was wonderful.
Synagogues stayed open around the clock to accommodate all of the couples who wanted to marry. Some rabbis performed as many as 8 weddings a day. In the years after the war, the returning servicemen would challenge America to live up to the values they had fought for so fiercely: democracy, equality, and religious tolerance for all.
One of the things that happens to Jewish soldiers after the war is that the military teaches you how to fight, how to stand up for yourself. And Jewish servicemen in Miami, for example, would put on their uniforms and go from hotel to hotel that had these signs of, no Jews, no dogs, and say, we're Jews. You should not discriminate. We served.
I think seeing what had happened to Jews and knowing that people were trying to wipe us out completely, I knew I had to do more about being a Jew than just being a Jew. I had to be active in some way.
Some Jewish veterans chose to fight for a Jewish homeland in Israel. They smuggled arms into Palestine, helped refugees emigrate from Europe, and even joined the Israeli Air Force. In May 1948, the State of Israel was established. 1/3 of its citizens were survivors of the Holocaust. The United States now had the largest Jewish community in the world, numbering some 5 million. It would be their responsibility to create a new Jewish American culture and society.
In the 1950s, Judaism really becomes an American religion. You can't talk about a Christian country anymore. Now you talk about a Judeo-Christian country. And discriminating against people who are Jews or who are blacks makes us like the very Nazis whom we defeated.
For some of the GIs, getting involved in civil rights was really an extension of what they had been fighting for in the war. Fighting for democracy or for equality. All of this translated into fighting for civil rights.
I went on 5 freedom rides. I spoke in many churches down south. I went with Martin Luther King across the bridge in Selma. I'm not going to be part of a silent majority when people are being persecuted. I want to help people.
The triumphs and horrors of World War II had changed the Jewish servicemen and women forever. Some would become the voices of their generation, describing the war they had lived through with a critical eye. Norman Mailer's novel, The Naked and the Dead, based on his service in the Pacific, would skyrocket its 25-year-old author to fame. J.D. Salinger would draw on the pain of his own experience in The Catcher in the Rye, which would become a great classic of American literature. Other Jewish veterans of World War II, including Herman Wouk, Leon Uris, and Joseph Heller, would also write best-selling novels, bringing a Jewish perspective to the story of war. Cy Lewin, who would become a celebrated artist, incorporated his memories of the war into his painting. In 1951, Albert Einstein sent Lewin a letter after seeing his drawings. "Our time needs you and your work," he wrote.
Perhaps it makes people think I hate the war. Much of my work consists of what I like to think of anti-war material.
And after the war, I was badly scarred. I'm badly scarred and no teeth. And I looked terrible until I got my plastic surgery. I thought God saved me for a reason, to help people and do good in the world. I became a doctor. I helped a lot of people, saved people's lives.
After the war, I had to decide, what am I going to do now? I thought, I've done so much destruction, I want to help people now. I thought, I'll become a rabbi. I encourage Jews to maintain their faith, not to lose faith. We have to improve mankind. That's our mission.
I didn't talk about my service for 50 years, but now I speak all over. It's like a calling with me. I want these young people to know what happened back then. I've always felt proud to be a Jew, and I try to get along with all different people. I always repeat what Maya Angelou said, we're more alike than different. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or Catholic or black or white. I do the best I can to try to get rid of the hate. That's the only reason I talk about it. I'm just telling how it affected me as a young American GI, because I want the young people to know the truth. I want to be sure that they have a better world.